I turned the key in the lock and quietly opened the front door. The house was dark, the only light coming from a night light in the living room that I'd left on for our son. The hallway smelled of milk and slightly stale diapers. I ran my hand tiredly over my face and closed the door behind me. My 24-hour shift at the fire department was finally over, but I had another, much harder job ahead of me at home. "Sarah," I called softly, trying not to wake the baby. There was no answer. I carefully removed my heavy boots and walked into the living room. My wife, Sarah, was curled up under a thin blanket on the sofa. As I approached, I saw that she was asleep. Her eyes were tightly closed, her face pale and tired. The tip of an empty bottle of formula was sticking out from under the blanket next to her hand. It looked like she had passed out in the middle of feeding. Sighing softly, I picked up the bottle and set it on the coffee table. Little Connor was asleep in his carrot next to the couch. I peered inside carefully. My son was snoring peacefully, his tiny fingers clutching the corner of his blanket. Seeing this serene scene, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because at least now we were both asleep and the house was quiet. Sadness because Sarah had fallen asleep here in the living room and not next to me as she had once been. I sat down on the edge of the sofa and gently adjusted the blanket that had slipped off my wife's shoulders. She hadn't woken up. The dark circles under her eyes seemed even deeper in the dim light of the nightlight. The last few months had been incredibly difficult for her and for both of us. Connor's birth, instead of the joy she'd expected, had driven Sarah into some kind of hopeless despair. I knew only a little about postpartum depression, but when I came face to face with it, I was completely unprepared. At first, I tried to help. I took over the night feedings, rocked my son when he cried, cooked simple meals so that Sarah would at least eat something. But she seemed to have withdrawn into a shell. I would often find her sitting on the bed or the couch with a vacant look in her eyes. She would not leave the house for long periods of time and stopped answering calls from her friends. We hardly spoke. Sarah was either sleeping or quietly crying, thinking that I was not watching. My gaze slid to the wall where our wedding photo hung in a neat frame. In it, we were laughing, hugging each other, young and happy. It was hard to believe that more than 7 years had passed since that day. All sorts of things had happened. We had survived the loss of a pregnancy 3 years ago, then the death of Sarah's father, my serious injury at work. But we always stuck together, supported each other. I thought that the birth of a child would only strengthen our family after all the troubles. However, the reality turned out to be different. Instead of joy, there was endless anxiety and sadness. I remember how in the first week after the hospital, Sarah literally did not let go of Connor, was afraid to move away from the cradle. She hardly slept, listening to his every rustle, checking his breathing. And then, about a month later, something changed. Anxiety was replaced by apathy. Sarah became detached, as if the child was not hers. Sometimes it seemed to me that she simply automatically carried out the necessary actions, feeding, changing clothes, but without joy, without a sparkle in her eyes. I didn't blame her. I'd read that hormones can play a cruel joke, that a woman can feel empty after having a baby. But it's one thing to read, another to watch your beloved wife fade away day by day. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get through to her. I leaned down and kissed Sarah gently on the temple. She stirred slightly, wrinkling her forehead, but did not wake. Her light brown hair smelled of shampoo and something medicinal, perhaps the remnants of the cream she used to treat the cracks in her skin from constantly washing bottles and cleaning. "I'm home," I whispered, although I knew she wouldn't hear. A familiar pang of loneliness stabbed at my chest. Lately, I felt like a guest in my own home. During the day, when I was gone, Sarah was alone. When I returned, she was either asleep or too tired to talk. Sometimes I felt like her depression was a dark pit from which even Connor and I couldn't see. I stood up and leaned over the bassinet, carefully lifting our son into my arms. He squeaked softly and blinked, but did not fully wake up. I decided to move him to the crib so Sarah could sleep more comfortably. Stepping carefully, I carried the warm bundle into the nursery. The room was small and smelled of talcum powder and baby cream. A star glowed softly in the nightlight, the same one we had chosen together before our son was born, when Sarah was pregnant. I laid Connor on his back in the crib and covered him with a blanket. He mumbled something in his sleep and turned his head, but he slept soundly. On the shelf next to the crib stood a teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's father, before he passed away. Looking at the toy, I remembered the day when the pregnancy test showed 2 stripes. We were afraid to believe the happiness, then the pain of loss from being pregnant a year before was too fresh. Sarah then cried from joy and fear at the same time, and I promised myself that I would do everything to protect them, my wife and the unborn baby. I looked at Connor, at his tiny face. The feeling that I had failed both him and her washed over me. I had failed. Sarah was suffering, and I didn't know how to help her. Back in the living room, I picked Sarah up carefully, trying not to wake her. She had lost so much weight in the last few months that she seemed almost weightless. I carried her into our bedroom and laid her on the bed. She mumbled something in her sleep, but her eyes never opened. I pulled the covers over her and paused for a moment, looking at her pale face. Before, Sarah always woke up when I came home. Even if she was sleepy, she would greet me with a kiss, ask how my day was. Now there was silence. I quietly left the bedroom, closing the door. The fatigue came back with renewed vigor. I wanted to sleep unbearably, but I knew that the night was not over yet. Connor would most likely wake up in the morning, and he would need either food or a diaper change. And Sarah might wake up in tears. That happened. As I passed the living room, I automatically turned off the bedside lamp. The room was dark, with only the faintest moonlight filtering through the undrawn curtains. I sat down in the chair and rubbed my face with my hand. It had been a tough day at work today, a fire in a warehouse on the outskirts of Denver. We had managed to save 2 people, but one warehouse worker had suffered serious burns. Days like these are exhausting. In the past, I would have come home and told Sarah what had happened and shared my feelings. But not now. Now each of us has our own pain, and we exist as if in parallel worlds. I found myself sitting in complete silence for several minutes, staring into the darkness. I needed to at least change out of my uniform into something homely, take a shower. But I had almost no strength left. Finally, I forced myself to get up and move toward the bathroom. As I passed the bedroom, I listened. Quiet. So far, so good. In the bathroom, I turned on the dim light and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Looking back at me from my face was a tired man with stubble and dull eyes. I barely recognized myself. I am only 36, but now I feel much older. A quick hot shower perked me up a bit. I put on a clean t-shirt and sweatpants and dried my damp hair with a towel. Sleep or be on duty, I thought. Lately, I had often chosen the latter, preferring to stay awake and look after the house. But today my strength was running out. I tiptoed into the bedroom and quietly climbed onto my side of the bed, trying not to disturb Sarah. She was lying with her back to me, breathing evenly. I noticed an empty bottle of pills on the nightstand next to her. Her doctor had prescribed antidepressants, but Sarah seemed to have stopped taking them. The empty bottle was a persistent reminder she needed serious help. A small sigh escaped my chest. I gently touched her shoulder, wanting some kind of contact, but then pulled my hand away. "Good night," I whispered in the darkness, knowing she wouldn't answer. And so I fell asleep, looking at the ceiling and listening to her breathing, full of a sadness that was now alien to me. In the morning, I was awakened by Connor's crying. I immediately jerked awake, my sleep gone. The baby was crying shrilly and demanding, probably hungry or in need of a diaper change. There was no one in the bed next to me. At some point in the morning, Sarah had quietly gotten up. I quickly crawled out from under the covers and headed to the nursery. Sarah stood over the crib, rocking and soothing her son. She looked like she could barely stand upright. Her hair was disheveled. She was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt with a milk stain on the shoulder. Connor was screaming, and Sarah seemed ready to cry along with him. "Let me take it," I quietly suggested, coming up from behind and gently touching her shoulder. Sarah flinched as if she hadn't noticed my presence. She held the baby tighter for a second, then, without saying a word, handed him over to me. As soon as he was in my arms, I laid his head on the crook of my elbow as usual and began to rock him, slightly swinging my leg. Connor soon stopped straining and switched to plaintive sobbing. "Everything is fine, son. Daddy is here," I muttered, lightly patting him on the back. I watched Sarah out of the corner of my eye. She stood there, her arms hanging at her sides as if lost. I noticed her lips were trembling. "Sarah," I began carefully, "can you get some formula? I think he's hungry." She nodded without looking at me and slowly trudged into the kitchen. I continued to rock the baby gently. My heart sank with pity for both my son and my wife. When Sarah returned with the bottle, her eyes were red, as if she had just been crying. Silently, she handed me the bottle. I sat down in the rocking chair in the corner of the nursery and carefully began to feed Connor. He sucked greedily, smacking his lips. Sarah sank down on the edge of the sofa opposite and wrapped her arms around herself. She watched me feed my son, but her thoughts seemed far away. "Did you get some sleep?" I asked quietly, trying not to sound reproachful in my voice. She shrugged. "I don't remember." "Probably not," she answered quietly. I nodded. The conversation was not going well. Lately, any attempts I made to find out how she was feeling were met with this wall of indifference or fatigue. "It's Saturday today," I continued cautiously after a pause. "I have the day off. Let's try going for a walk together. The weather seems nice, the sun is shining, the birds are singing. The fresh air will do you good." Sarah shook her head before I finished my sentence. "I don't want to go outside," she snapped. "Well, maybe at least outside, with a stroller. You need to unwind, and Connor needs vitamin D." "Jason, I said I don't want to." Her voice was sharp. "I'm tired. I don't have the energy to dress up and pretend everything's okay." "You don't need to dress up. Just go out for 10 minutes, I objected softly. "You sit at home all day." She covered her eyes with her palm, as if in pain. "Please don't push me," Sarah whispered. I fell silent. Connor, meanwhile, had finished almost half of the bottle and was beginning to fall asleep in my arms, snoring contentedly. I carefully took out the empty bottle, put it aside, and waited for my son to finally fall asleep. A tense silence hung in the room. Only the ticking of the wall clock and the quiet breathing of the child broke the silence. When I was sure Connor was asleep, I carefully got up and laid him back in his crib. The blanket on him was damp from his recent tears, so I changed it for a dry one. Sarah continued to sit on the couch, looking at the floor. "Shall I make breakfast?" I suggested hesitantly. "You hardly ate anything yesterday." "No need," she answered quickly. "I'm not hungry." I held back a sigh. She hadn't had an appetite since the baby was born. She literally ate through force, and only because I insisted. Now, judging by the expression on her face, every topic weighed on her. "Okay, then maybe just tea or coffee," I persisted, hoping to somehow bring her out of her stupor. "Jason," Sarah said wearily, "please leave me alone. Go and rest. You've been up since last night." There was no anger in her voice, only endless fatigue and emptiness. But these words hurt me more than a scream. "Leave me alone," as if I was bothering her with my presence, my care. "Okay," I answered quietly. "If you need anything, I'm here." She didn't answer. I left the nursery, closing the door behind me, and stood in the hallway, feeling my hands drop helplessly. What to do? How to get through to her? The doctor said that it will pass, that time and support are needed. But how much longer will this continue? I remembered a month ago when we visited our family doctor. Sarah had confessed her feelings to him, that she was constantly crying, that she felt like a worthless mother, that nothing made her happy. The doctor had gently explained to us about postpartum depression, saying that it was not uncommon. He had prescribed her antidepressants and recommended that she attend group therapy for young mothers. Sarah had only nodded, but after that visit almost nothing had changed. She had tried taking the medications at first, but soon quit. She had said that they only made her feel worse. I had also reminded her about the support group, but she had brushed it off. I went into the kitchen and mechanically began to tidy up through the used diapers in the trash, rinse the bottles. It was easier to do something physically useful than to uselessly rush about in my worries. While I was washing the dishes, the phone rang. A name appeared on the screen. Kate. Kate is an old friend of mine. We grew up on neighboring streets and have been friends since childhood. She knew both me and Sarah well. She was our bridesmaid at our wedding. Lately, we hardly saw each other. I had neither the time nor the mood for communication. But Kate persistently continued to call at least once a week, inquiring about our affairs. I wiped my hands on a towel and pressed the call accept button. Hello, I tried to sound cheerful. Hi, Jay. How are you? Haven't heard from you in ages. Kate's cheerful voice came through the receiver. Oh, just like that. Everything is as usual, I answered evasively. How's Sarah? How's the baby? Kate always called Connor baby, even though I'd corrected him more than once that he was a boy. Connor, I automatically corrected, is growing up little by little. Sarah isn't having an easy time. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I regretted my frankness. I generally tried not to spread the word about our situation, but somehow Kate immediately brought me to the surface. I'm sorry, she said quietly after a pause. I was worried about you. Everything's fine, I lied. It's just, well, the kid, lack of sleep, all that stuff. Jason, I can see that not everything is normal, she objected softly. Are you accepting any help? Your parents, her mother. Someone can come, sit with the baby, give you a break. My mother can't, she can barely walk, she has arthritis, I answered. And Sarah's mother. We don't want to worry her, she's going through her own grief after her father's death. I remembered that Sarah's mother, Lucy, had barely recovered from the loss of her husband in the last 6 months. We visited her, but we didn't want to talk about the problems with her grandson and daughter. It would be another reason to worry. I understand, Kate sighed. And maybe a paid nanny? Sarah is against it. In general, we are on our own for now. Well, to be honest, you sound like a squeezed lemon, my friend, Kate said sympathetically. Maybe I'll come over in a few days. I'll help out in any way I can. Cook some food or take Connor for a walk, and you can get some sleep. I closed my eyes, imagining how nice it would be to not have to think about anything for a couple of hours. But I knew Sarah wouldn't agree to that. Thank you, Kate, but not yet, I declined. Sarah doesn't really want guests. Okay, she said after a pause, but the offer still stands. And Jason, promise me you'll call if you need anything, okay? I'm worried. I promise, I nodded, although she couldn't see it. Thank you. We said goodbye, and I put the phone down on the table. A lump formed in my throat. Kate's words, "You sound like a squeezed lemon," described my state too accurately. But it seemed that there was no one to help us from the outside. We had to cope somehow on our own. I decided to make breakfast anyway, at least for myself, since Sarah had refused. While I was whisking eggs for an omelet, Sarah quietly entered the kitchen. I looked at her. She was like a shadow, quiet, her shoulders drooping, her eyes empty. Who called? She asked quietly. Kate, I replied, pouring the omelet into the pan. She asked how we were. I see, Sarah nodded weakly and leaned her hip against the table, watching me manipulate my breakfast. I didn't know what else to say. There was silence, broken only by the sizzling of eggs in the frying pan. When the omelet was ready, I transferred it to a plate. Sarah looked away, as if the smell of the food was unpleasant to her. Are you sure you don't want anything? Nothing at all? I tried one last time. She shook her head. I sat down at the table. It was impossible to eat in the oppressive silence. The lump in my throat from our detachment only grew. Sarah still stood motionless. Sarah, I called quietly, pushing the plate away. She looked at me with empty eyes. I'm afraid for you, I said honestly, and for us. Her lips trembled and her face contorted as if I had hit her. It's scary, she echoed. I'm scared too, Jason. Every day. She lowered her head. I saw the tears falling to the floor, glittering in the morning light. I stood up and walked over to her, hesitantly touching her shoulders. This time she didn't pull away. I hugged her, and she buried her face in my chest, sobbing. "Forgive me," she whispered through tears. "Forgive me. I can't cope. I'm so ashamed." "SHH, it's okay," I muttered, though my chest was constricted with pain. "It's not your fault. We just need time. You'll get better, I believe." Sarah just shook her head, still crying. I could feel her body shaking in my arms, and I couldn't do anything. All I could do was stand there and stroke her back, whispering soothing nonsense. At that moment, I thought that this might be the turning point. If Sarah could cry with me, maybe she would let me come closer, let me help. She cried for a long time. Minutes passed, the omelet on the table got cold, and my legs were numb from standing for so long, but I didn't move. Finally, her sobs began to subside. She pulled away slightly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her t-shirt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm a total wimp, aren't I?" "Stop it," I said softly, trying to catch her eye. "You have nothing to apologize for. You feel bad, I understand. I just want to help." She nodded, looking somewhere into my chest, avoiding eye contact. "I'll really try to go out today," she said suddenly. "I'll try." There was a tired determination in her voice, and I was glad. "Let's do it together, later in the day, when you've rested," I suggested cautiously. "Okay," Sarah replied. I smiled slightly for the first time in a long time. There was a feeling that a ray of hope had flickered. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Sarah even ate a couple of spoonfuls of oatmeal when I made her food again later, and didn't object when I insisted she lie down and sleep while Connor did. She looked a little better by lunchtime, at least her eyes weren't so empty. We actually got ready for a short walk. We dressed Connor and put him in the stroller. Sarah put on some clean clothes and tried to comb her hair. I noticed her wincing in the sunlight as she left the building, but we walked around the block for about 20 minutes anyway. We barely talked during the walk, but the fact that she got outside was already a small victory. However, by evening her mood had dropped again. She did not eat dinner, citing nausea. I decided not to press. After putting Connor to bed, Sarah said only, "I'll go to bed early," and went to the bedroom. I was left alone in the kitchen, clearing away the dishes left over from the baby food and formula. The joy of the morning seemed distant. I knew that one good hour wouldn't solve the problem. We still had many months of dealing with her depression ahead of us, and it was getting harder and harder to cope. When I came into the bedroom later, Sarah was already asleep on the edge of the bed, facing the wall. I lay down next to her, leaving space between us. We used to cuddle before bed, but now that ritual is gone. In the darkness, I felt alone again. A seditious thought crept into my head. What if the best thing I could do now was take more shifts, work until she got better? Sarah seemed even calmer when I was not around. Maybe my helplessness only irritated her. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Sarah was breathing evenly next to me. Our son was sleeping, and between me and my wife, a wall was growing that I didn't know how to break down. The days were merging into a gray, monotonous mass. Autumn was coming into its own in Denver. A cold wind was driving yellow leaves through the streets. The early twilight was melancholy. In our house, it seemed to always be twilight, no matter the weather outside. Several weeks had passed since that morning conversation in the kitchen when Sarah had cried in my arms. I had hoped that this would be the beginning of her recovery, but the improvement was temporary. The very next day, she had withdrawn into herself again. Those brief moments of closeness when she had allowed herself to be comforted seemed to have left no trace. I started taking overtime shifts. Firstly, the money was useful. The baby required expenses, and the medical bills for the birth and subsequent therapy for Sarah were running up quite a bit. Secondly, to be honest, it was easier for me at work now than at home. Sarah didn't mind my extra shifts. Sometimes I thought she was even glad I wasn't there. She didn't have to pretend everything was okay. When I got home, we exchanged the most basic phrases. "Has Connor eaten?" "Yes, he has." How are you? Fine. In her voice, indifference. In mine, tiredness. Sometimes, less than a dozen words passed between us over the course of a whole day. We lived under the same roof like neighbors, united only by feeding schedules and diaper changes. One evening, I returned later than usual. I was detained clearing the rubble after a fire. When I entered the apartment, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Connor's loud crying was coming from the bedroom, and the door was closed. Usually, Sarah would immediately pick up her son when he started crying, despite her apathy. I rushed into the bedroom and threw open the door. Sarah was sitting on the bed, curled up in a ball, covering her ears with her hands. Connor was lying in his crib, screaming his head off. The sight horrified me. "Sarah," I cried, rushing to my son. "What's going on?" I picked up the crying baby and started rocking him, trying to calm him down. He was scared and upset. He had probably been crying for a long time. His face was flushed, and hot tears were rolling down his cheeks. Sarah slowly raised her head, her eyes empty, her lips trembling. "I can't," she whispered barely audibly. "I'm sorry. I couldn't." I held Connor close, feeling a mixture of anger and pity welling up inside me. Anger because she had left our son to cry for who knows how long, pity because Sarah looked so devastated. I sat down next to her on the bed, continuing to rock the baby with one hand. "How long has he been crying?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from breaking into a scream. "I don't know. 10 minutes. 15. She answered lifelessly. Connor began to calm down in my arms, but he was still sobbing. I stroked his back, feeling my heart pounding. "Why didn't you take it?" I asked quietly. "You heard it, Sarah." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks again. "I'm scared. I'm afraid that I'll drop him, or that he won't stop crying, that I can't do anything." She suddenly began to babble, closing her eyes. "I'm a bad mother. Bad." She put her head in her hands. I looked at her in shock. Of course, I knew she was insecure, but to this extent. "You're not a bad mother," I said firmly, although everything inside was shaking. "You're depressed. It's an illness. You love Connor. You just need help." She didn't react at all, continuing to rock back and forth. Connor had calmed down, only whining occasionally. I put him back in his crib. This time the baby didn't object. It seemed that fatigue had finally taken its toll. When my son was asleep, I turned back to Sarah. She was still sitting there, rocking, quietly repeating, "Bad mother, bad." I carefully took her by the shoulders, trying to stop this mechanical movement. "Look at me," I asked softly. She reluctantly opened her wet eyes. I noticed that her hands were shaking. "You need help, honey," I said, trying to sound confident. "We need help. I can't do this alone, you see." Sarah started crying again, hiding her face in her hands. I hugged her, holding her tightly so she would feel my support. "Remember when the doctor recommended a support group?" I whispered to her. "Let's try going, or I'll go with you if you want." She sobbed into my chest. "No, don't do it with me." She squeezed out. "I'll do it myself. I have to learn it myself." I stroked her back, feeling my shoulder getting wet with tears through my shirt. "Okay, I won't insist," I said quietly. "But just think about it. It might help." She didn't answer, but at least she didn't push me away. That night, I barely slept. I sat next to Connor's crib, watching him breathe in his sleep, and I listened to every sound Sarah made. She had fallen asleep after crying for so long, and I was afraid she might want to hurt herself out of despair. I had read somewhere that women with severe depression have thoughts like that. I was afraid to leave her alone, even for a minute. The next day I called work and asked to take off half my shift, explaining that I was having family problems. The management was accommodating, although I knew I wouldn't be able to miss that much time. I fed and bathed Connor myself, put him to sleep during the day. Sarah lay almost all the time, facing the wall. Only once did she say to me, "You shouldn't have stayed, it's more useful at work." I kept quiet so as not to make things worse. Later that evening, while I was changing my son's diaper, Sarah quietly came out of the bedroom. She looked a little better, at least her eyes were dry. "Jason," she said quietly. I looked up. Yes, I was thinking, maybe I should really try going to this. Group therapy. It seems like there's supposed to be a meeting today. Everything inside me turned over with relief. I almost exhaled loudly, but pulled myself together, trying not to show too much joy so as not to scare off her decision. "I think that's a great idea," I said softly. "I'll babysit Connor, don't worry." She nodded and, after a slight pause, added, "The meeting is at 7 in the city center at the hospital clinic. Should I give you a ride?" I immediately offered, but she shook her head. "No, I'll take the bus myself. It's even better. I need to be alone to rest." "Okay," I agreed, although I was worried about how she would travel alone. But I decided not to insist. She needed independence now. By 6 o'clock, Sarah had taken a shower and even tidied herself up a bit. She braided her hair and put on jeans and a sweater. She still looked tired, but there was something purposeful in her movements that I hadn't seen for a long time. Before leaving, she looked into the nursery. Connor was awake and lying quietly, looking at the toy mobile above his crib. Sarah came over and hesitantly ran her hand through his soft hair. "Mommy will be back soon," she whispered. Her voice sounded strained, but at least she tried. She kissed her son on the forehead, then turned to me. "Thank you for staying with him," she said quietly. I don't know if it will work. What if I can't talk there?" "Just go and listen to others," I gently encouraged her. "No one will force you to share if you don't want to, but maybe it will make you feel better to know that you're not the only one." Sarah nodded. I saw a hint of gratitude in her eyes, and my heart warmed. It had been a long time since I had seen anything but pain or emptiness in her gaze. "Good luck," I said, walking her to the door. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled. Of course, one meeting wouldn't solve all the problems, but the fact that she agreed to go out and go somewhere alone was a huge step. Left alone with my son, I found myself worrying as if I was taking a test. Would everything go smoothly? Would Sarah be accepted into this group, or would she close herself off even more? Connor started walking around, catching my attention. I picked him up and walked around the living room. "Well, son, let's hope our mother is a good girl. She'll cope," I told him, although he hardly understood. But I needed to say these words to calm at least someone, at least myself. About 3 hours passed. During this time, I managed to feed Connor some porridge, change him into his pajamas, and put him to bed for the night. Sarah still hadn't returned, although I had a rough idea. The meeting lasted an hour, plus the drive there and back, which meant she should have been home by 9 or a little later. At 9:30, I started to worry. Thoughts crept into my head, one more frightening than the other. What if she felt ill on the way? What if she changed her mind and didn't go, but was sitting somewhere alone, suffering? Or maybe she decided to leave us altogether. I paced the kitchen, glancing at my watch over and over again and listening to the sounds of the entrance. Finally, at a little after 9, I heard the front door open. I hurried into the hallway. Sarah stood in the doorway, taking off her coat. She looked tired, but different, relieved, I suppose. Her cheeks were a little flushed from the cold. When she saw me, she tried to smile. Her lips twitched in a faint shadow of a smile. "You're back," I exhaled, feeling the anxiety leave my chest. "Yes," she answered quietly. "Sorry I was late. We talked a little more after the group." "There's nothing to apologize for. The main thing is, how are you? Did everything go well?" I looked at her hopefully. Sarah nodded and walked into the living room, sinking into a chair. I followed her, sitting down opposite her on the sofa. She looked very tired, but some weight seemed to have been lifted from her shoulders. "There were about 10 people there," she began quietly. "The same mothers who had depression or anxiety after giving birth. And a couple of dads. One even came with his baby." I listened silently, afraid to interrupt. For the first time in a long time, she was telling me something. Everyone spoke in turns. At first, I didn't want to. I just listened. And then, She hesitated, nervously tugging at the edge of her sleeve. Then it just happened. I talked a little. She glanced at me quickly and then looked away. "You're a great girl," I said quietly. Sarah shrugged. They were all telling such stories. One woman has a third child, and every time she has PPD, she used the English abbreviation postpartum depression. She's used to it, but it's still hard. Another said that she thought about. In general, it's awful how many of us there are. For the first time, I could hear real emotion in her voice, sympathy, indignation, liveliness. I almost didn't recognize my wife, who had been speaking in a quiet monotone or not speaking at all for the past few months. "And you? Did you feel better now that you had it out?" I asked carefully. Sarah nodded. "A little. It was scary, of course, to talk. But there is such an atmosphere there. No one judges. And the psychologist leads the group, a very kind woman. Will you come again? If I could, I would cross my fingers in anticipation of an answer." She smiled slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching. "They meet once a week?" "I think so. I'll try to go next time." I smiled, probably sincerely for the first time in many days. "I'm glad, Sarah. I really am." She looked at me, and for a second our eyes met. It seemed to me that she was happy too, just a little, but a spark flashed in the depths of her tired gaze. "Thank you for your support," she said quietly, "and for sitting with your son. I know it's not easy for you either." "Don't talk nonsense. It's not hard for me," I answered softly. "I like spending time with him. The main thing is that you feel better." Sarah looked away, lowering her head. "I'll try." "For you," she said barely audibly. That night, I went to bed with cautious optimism. Sarah came to bed later, sitting alone in the living room for a while, apparently thinking about what had happened. But before she went to bed, she said to me unexpectedly, "Good night." These were the first words she had said to me before bed in a long time. I quietly replied, "Good night," and turned over, feeling strangely relieved. Maybe things will get better. I just had to be patient and give her time. However, I could not even imagine where the new path that Sarah took when she decided to leave her cocoon would lead us. A few more months passed. Life was slowly getting back to some sort of routine. After the new year, Sarah continued to go to the support group weekly. I noticed that these meetings were producing results. At least for a day or two after they were over, she became a little more lively. She began to cope better with caring for Connor. She no longer forgot to feed or change him. She herself took the initiative to bathe the baby or take him for a walk during the day. Of course, it was too early to talk about a full recovery. Sarah was still withdrawn and quiet, often sad. But compared to that cold October, when she lay flat out for days on end, the changes were striking. I tried not to flatter myself, but I couldn't help but hope that our marriage would begin to thaw along with her. Sometimes in the evening, we would even exchange a few phrases about something other than the baby. Sarah would mention something in the news or ask me about work. These were awkward attempts at normal conversation, but I appreciated them. However, there was still an invisible barrier between us. I felt it especially acutely in rare moments of solitude. So, one night, when Connor unexpectedly slept for a long time and did not wake up, I woke up and discovered that Sarah was also awake, lying next to me with her eyes open. The moonlight fell on her face, and in it I saw something close and alien at the same time. I suddenly had a strong desire to touch her, to feel her not only as a bedmate, but as a wife, a beloved woman. I timidly reached out and stroked her hand. "Are you awake?" I asked quietly. "I'm not sleeping," she answered just as quietly. "Is everything okay?" I moved a little closer. She didn't move away, but she didn't turn towards me either. "Yes, it's just that thoughts are creeping into my head," Sarah sighed. My hand was on her forearm. I stroked her skin with my thumb, as if to soothe her. It was cold to the touch. "What are your thoughts?" I asked cautiously, hoping that she would open up. Sarah was silent. "Different," she answered evasively. "About life. About how everything turned out." I felt the tension in her body. Deciding not to press with questions, I moved from stroking to a light embrace. I wrapped my arm around her waist under the blanket and pulled her a little closer to me. She always liked it when I did that before, but now her body remained tense. After a few seconds, she said quietly, "Jason, don't. I'm sorry." I immediately let go of her, feeling how everything inside me clenched with pain. "I'm sorry," I echoed. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," she said quickly, but her voice shook. "I'm just not ready." "I understand," I exhaled, although tears of resentment and disappointment involuntarily welled up in my eyes. We fell silent. I rolled back onto my side of the bed, feeling the gap between us again. Sarah carefully turned her back to me and pulled the blanket tighter around her. Turning away, I looked at the dimly glowing night city outside the window and wondered what I was doing wrong. Sarah seemed to be getting better, but she didn't take a single step towards me. Maybe I was waiting in vain for her to love me again the way she used to. Or worse, she didn't love me at all anymore. The next morning, we didn't think about the incident. I pretended nothing special had happened, and neither did Sarah. We went about our usual business. She fed Connor oatmeal, and I got ready for work. Before leaving, I kissed the top of my son's head and hesitated before approaching Sarah. She was standing at the sink, washing her breakfast mugs. I touched her shoulder, and when she turned around, I gave her a light peck on the cheek. Her face remained impassive, but she didn't pull away, just breathed out something like, "Have a nice day." Her cheek tasted salty, either from her tears or from her night cream. I didn't bother to find out. At work that day, I had a nagging thought. Maybe couples therapy would be the best solution for us. If Sarah couldn't cope on her own, maybe a therapist could help us get our relationship back on track. I'd heard stories of couples getting out of crisis with the help of a therapist. Over lunch, I mentioned this to a colleague, a senior firefighter named Tom, with whom I often ate together. Without going into detail, I mentioned that my wife had been depressed after giving birth and was feeling better now, but the relationship had sagged. "You know, my sister and her husband went to see a psychologist after the birth of their child," Tom shared, biting into a sandwich. "They were also on the verge of divorce, constantly arguing. It seems to have helped them." "Yes," I raised my head with interest. "And where did they find a competent specialist?" Tom shrugged. "I don't know the details, but if you want, I'll ask her for her contact information." "I would be grateful," I nodded. That conversation gave me hope that maybe Sarah and I should give it a try. However, when I returned home in the evening and cautiously started a conversation with her about this, her reaction was cool. We were putting Connor to bed. He was being capricious, not wanting to fall asleep. I suggested, "Sarah, what if we go to a psychologist together? What do you think about that?" She was just adjusting the blanket on her son, froze for a moment, and looked at me as if I was crazy. "Why?" she asked shortly. "Well, to help our relationship, to discuss all the difficulties." I began, trying to speak softly. "This is no less important than your group." Sarah shook her head. "I don't think there's any point yet. Right now, all my energy is spent on trying to come to my senses. On us." She hesitated. "In short, not now." Her words, "on us," made me feel cold. It seemed like our marriage was somewhere near the bottom of the priority list, if it was on the list at all. "I understand," I said quietly, lowering my gaze. Sarah took my hand, an unexpected move. I looked at her in surprise. "I'm sorry," she said tiredly. I just nodded, not knowing what to answer. The following Wednesday, when Sarah had a group, she came home later than usual. Usually she was home around 9, but this time the clock was almost 10 when I heard the key in the lock. As usual, I was sitting with Connor now in the evenings. After he was put to bed, I had some free time, and I tried to devote it to reading or some little household chores. This time, however, I was worried because Sarah was late. When she finally arrived, I met her in the hallway with involuntary anxiety. "Is everything okay? You were late today." Sarah took off her jacket and boots, smiling slightly at the corners of her lips, something rare for her. "Yes, everything is fine. It's just that after the meeting, one of the women from the group, and I sat and started talking. I didn't notice how time passed. I tried to hide the jealous sting that struck me because someone else, and not me, was honored with her lively conversation. Well, the main thing is that you're okay. She nodded. Her eyes were a little more lively than usual, and there was a slight blush on her cheeks. She was clearly benefiting from this conversation. Later that night, when we were already in bed, each on his own side, as usual, I noticed her phone screen light up. Sarah turned on her side, her back to me, and for a moment I thought she was scrolling quickly, texting. Before, I wouldn't have paid attention, but now, for some reason, my heart sank with an incomprehensible alarm. However, I immediately pulled myself up. Nonsense, someone from the group must have sent her a message, maybe that friend with whom they were sitting after the meeting, or some kind of notification. It's not my business to butt in. Especially since things are already difficult between us, the last thing we need is jealousy out of nowhere. I turned away and forced myself to close my eyes. The next day, while going through my mail, I came across an envelope addressed to Sarah, from the Denver Board of Education. It turned out to be a reminder from work. Her maternity leave was ending, and they needed confirmation that she would be returning to work in the spring. That evening, I showed the envelope to Sarah. She raised her eyebrows in surprise, as if she couldn't believe that time had flown by so quickly. You need to decide whether you're coming back for the spring semester or taking another leave, I said, handing her the letter. Sarah read, biting her lip nervously. I don't know, she said quietly. I used to think that I'd definitely be out by spring. But now, I'm not sure I'm ready to work with other people's children when I can barely cope with my own. Maybe work will help you get distracted, get back to your usual rhythm. I suggested cautiously. Your colleagues are probably waiting. You loved your job. Sarah shrugged. I'm not sure I still love you. Everything at school reminds me of. She trailed off. Dad, I guessed softly. Sarah's father had been a school principal for many years, and it was largely thanks to him that Sarah went into psychology. His death a year ago had hit her hard. Sarah nodded, looking away. And about Dad, too. She folded the piece of paper back into the envelope. Anyway, I'll think about it some more. I decided not to press. After all, we could get by with my earnings for now, especially since I had been working hard in recent months. It would be better to let him regain his strength. Soon I noticed that Sarah was spending more time on her phone, especially in the evenings when Connor was being put to bed. Before, she was usually so tired that she would just lie down or watch TV with half an eye. Now she would linger in the kitchen or living room, texting someone. When I would ask briefly who she was texting, Sarah would answer briefly, "Oh, just one of the moms in the group wrote," or something like that. I didn't ask too much. I was happy that she was interacting with people at all. One day, while she was putting the kettle on, I happened to see over her shoulder the name Nick flash up on the screen. The message read, "Thank you for talking to me today. Good night, Sarah." I quickly looked away, feeling like I was intruding on someone else's conversation. But I remembered the name, Nick. I remembered Sarah talking about a man in the group who had lost his wife. I think his name was Nick Harper. She mentioned that he was an English teacher with a young daughter and was going to the group to cope with the loneliness of his wife's death. Back then, listening to her story, I felt sympathy for this man. What a hard lot to be left alone with a child. Now, seeing his private message to Sarah, I felt a strange sense of unease. Although there was nothing reprehensible, just gratitude for the conversation, the fact that Sarah was communicating with a man from the group outside of the meeting made me think. However, I quickly dismissed my suspicions. Sarah had been through so much, and if she had found a friend in misfortune with whom she could more easily talk about her problems, then it would be a sin for me to be jealous. Moreover, Nick had suffered terrible grief. I even felt an involuntary respect for him for the fact that, having experienced such a thing, he continued to live for the sake of the child. And now, looking at her correspondence with another man, I felt fear creeping up on me. Could our connection have weakened so much that she needed support not from me, but from a stranger? But then I thought that I had no right to reproach her. After all, I had essentially distanced myself. I had run off to work, leaving her alone with depression for long hours. In such a situation, anyone would reach out to the one who was nearby. And next to her now were people from the group, the same as she. That same Nick apparently understands her, as I cannot, after all, I did not lose my spouse and was not a single parent. With these thoughts, I calmed myself then, driving away the emerging jealousy. Sarah and Nick are just friends in misfortune, supporting each other. In the end, I would be glad if she had girlfriends. Why not a male friend, especially if he has such a story? And yet, deep down inside, I felt uneasy. Something important was happening to my wife, and I felt like I was watching it from the sidelines, unable to intervene. Spring was coming into its own, but it still felt like winter in our house. It had been over a year since Connor was born. He had turned one, and we had even celebrated quietly at home, just the three of us, with a small cake that Sarah had baked the first time in a long time that she had wanted to bake something herself. Then, watching her help her son blow out a tiny candle, I thought that maybe the worst was over. However, soon after Connor's birthday, I began to notice changes that worried me. Sarah, although more active, seemed to have become even more distant. The reasons were no longer depression, but something else, something elusive. She was often lost in her thoughts, no longer overwhelmed by the former apathy, but something new had appeared: secrecy, perhaps. For example, she could suddenly, without warning, leave the house under the pretext of going to the store or taking a walk alone. Previously, it would never have occurred to her to leave me alone with the baby without an agreement. On the contrary, she was afraid to leave even for a minute. Now she could say, "I'll be quick, I need some fresh air," and disappear for an hour or an hour and a half. She would return with a bag of oranges or milk. It seemed like she really was going out on business. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was not only about the food. She now kept her phone with her at all times. Previously, it was lying around, often dead, because she had no time for it. Now, the device was almost always at hand in her pocket, next to her on the table. A couple of times, when I took her phone, for example, to move it from a chair, she immediately appeared next to me with a slight tense. "Give it to me, I'll do it myself." I was surprised then. Since when did she worry so much about her technology? In mid-March, on one of my rare free evenings, I suggested, "Let's go somewhere together. Kate can sit with Connor for a couple of hours." She suggested it herself. We were sitting in the kitchen after dinner. Sarah was scrolling through something on her phone. When she heard my offer, she looked at me somewhat guiltily. "Sorry, Jason. I can't today," she said. "I promised. There, to help a friend." "An acquaintance?" I asked again. "Well, the girl from the group. She needed to look after her child because she had a work event in the evening. I agreed to help." "Ah, I see." I tried to hide my disappointment. "Maybe tomorrow then." "Tomorrow is my day off. I have the group myself tomorrow evening," she reminded me. I nodded. It turned out that neither this evening nor the next were destined to come true. "Okay, maybe on the weekend," I sighed, collecting the plates. Sarah quickly stood up and put on her jacket. "I ran then," she said. "I left you a list on the table of what to do with Connor. Dinner, what time to put him to bed." "I can handle it. It's not the first time," I smiled tensely. She smiled slightly in response and was about to leave, but suddenly returned and gave me a short kiss on the cheek. "Thank you for understanding," she said quietly. I froze in surprise, but she had already slipped out the door. The evening passed quietly. I put my son to bed, then tried to watch the match on TV, but my head was occupied with something else. I couldn't stop thinking, who and why did she promise to help? Some girl from the group. Why Sarah? Previously, she hadn't been particularly close with anyone there, except for texting. And in general, it hasn't been like her to rush to help anyone in recent months. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the front door lock click. Sarah was back. I pretended to watch TV, but I was watching her out of the corner of my eye. She slipped into the living room, thinking I was engrossed in the game on the screen. "Hello," she said quietly. Hello, I said, turning down the volume. How did it go? It's fine. Her baby was capricious, but I put him to bed. She spoke as if she were normal, but something about her appearance was different. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks were flushed. She was clearly in a hurry to get back, or, on the contrary, was rushing somewhere. I suddenly caught an unfamiliar scent, an unusual, subtle aroma, definitely not her perfume. She rarely wore perfume lately. This scent trailed from her jacket, like men's cologne or aftershave. My heart sank, but I immediately tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe the child's father was home, or say she passed by someone in the entryway. There are options. Are you cold? I asked, noticing how she was shivering. A little, Sarah admitted, rubbing her palms together. The frost hit again, and I forgot my gloves. I stood up and walked towards her. Instinctively, I reached out to hug her since she was cold. I wanted to warm her with my own warmth. But she stepped back, clasping her hands on her chest. I'm going to take a hot shower, okay? She said quickly, without looking me in the eye. Of course, I muttered, dropping my hands. She disappeared into the bathroom, and I was left standing in the middle of the living room, clenching my fists, my heart pounding, my head spinning. Cologne. Where does the male smell come from? She said she was with a girl from the group. So, there was a man there too. Nonsense, I pulled myself up. Who knows, maybe that friend's husband came and Sarah hugged him goodbye, or maybe she was holding a child who smelled of his dad's perfume. Anything can happen. But the worm of doubt had already bitten in firmly. The night passed anxiously. Sarah got out of the shower, lay down, and fell asleep almost immediately. I tossed and turned for a long time, running through different scenarios in my head. What if she was lying to me? What if there was no friend? But where does she go then? Could it be to him? Names were spinning around in my head. Nick. Remembering that incident with the message, I could now connect the dots. Maybe that acquaintance was just an excuse, and in fact, she was seeing Nick. Why did I immediately think of him? Perhaps because I felt that this man had become close to her. Too close. I felt sick from the unpleasant guesses, so I tried to drive them away. After all, there was no evidence of anything unnatural, but an inner voice whispered the opposite. For a few days, I tried to act normal, although the tension between us was almost palpable. Sarah was also on edge, avoiding eye contact with me. We exchanged routine phrases, but there was clearly something unresolved in the air, as if a storm was brewing. At the end of the week, our first open conflict in a long time occurred. I was the initiator. My nerves couldn't take it. It happened on a Saturday. I came back from a 24-hour shift early. Around noon, the shift supervisor had agreed to come in early, and I decided to surprise Sarah and Connor. I wanted to spend time with them, maybe go somewhere together. As I climbed the stairs our elevators often broke down, I heard a noise from behind the slightly open door of the apartment. My heart skipped a beat. Was the door unlocked? We usually always close it, especially with a child. I walked in quietly. There was no one in the hallway, but Sarah's voice and Connor's crying could be heard from the living room. Her voice was irritated, almost broken. "Why are you crying again? I gave you a toy. Connor, please stop," she screamed. I have never heard her use such a tone before, on the verge of hysteria. I rushed into the living room. Sarah was standing in the middle of the room, her face red and angry, and our son was sitting on the rug, crying, having lost his pacifier. "What's going on here?" I asked loudly, picking up the pacifier from the floor and holding it out to my son. Sarah turned around, clearly taken aback by my sudden appearance. "You're early," was all she said, breathing heavily. I leaned over and picked Connor up, trying to calm him down. He was clinging to me, still sobbing. "I heard you scream." I tried to speak calmly, although everything inside was boiling. "Why like that? He's a child, Sarah." "I didn't scream," she snapped, avoiding my gaze. "Do you think I'm deaf?" I couldn't resist. "You were ready to lose your temper with him." Sarah exhaled convulsively and ran a trembling hand through her hair. "I'm sorry. I. She stopped, then suddenly blurted out in despair, "My nerves are just shot to hell, okay? All day long he's been hysterical, sometimes he cries, sometimes he doesn't eat. I'm already climbing the walls." I looked at her and didn't recognize her. Where had that gentle Sarah gone, who usually calmed her son with such tenderness? "Maybe it's not him, but you," I asked quietly, trying not to scare her sudden frankness. "What's going on, Sarah? Why are you so nervous?" She froze, then chuckled nervously. "What's going on?" she almost growled. "Nothing special. I'm a burnt-out mother, sitting at home for over a year without a single ray of light." "You go to the group, you have communication," I began, but she interrupted. "Communication? Once a week to cry on the shoulder of the same poor fellows? Yeah, it's fun, I must say." I froze. Her words were full of bile. "I thought the group was helping you," I said carefully. "It helps." She smiled bitterly. "Perhaps so. If it weren't for her, I would have completely gone crazy already." Connor had calmed down and was now stretching his arms toward the floor, apparently wanting to go back to playing. I lowered him onto the rug next to his teddy bear. "Sarah, let's talk calmly," I asked, coming closer. "You know you're not alone. I'm here. Kate's offering to help." "Kate," she suddenly snorted. "Your noble Kate. What do you all understand?" I was taken aback by this aggression. "Where do you get these words from? Kate is just a friend. She's worried." "I know," Sarah said tiredly, sinking onto the sofa. "I'm sorry. That's not what I meant." There was a tense silence. I gathered my courage and asked a question that made me feel cold inside. "Sarah, do you see Nick outside the group?" She looked up at me sharply, fear flashing in her eyes, then anger. "Why such a question?" She narrowed her eyes. "It's just, you disappear a lot. I thought, maybe you became friends and were dating." She opened her mouth slightly, as if I had hit her. "Are you following me?" she said slowly. "No, of course not." I shook my head, trying to stay calm. "But I'm not blind, Sarah. I can see that you've changed, and things are getting worse between us. Maybe it's someone else." "Another person?" she echoed, turning white. "What are you accusing me of? That I'm having an affair?" My heart sank. I didn't dare say it directly, but the words came from her lips. I just quietly said, "I'm not asserting anything. I'm asking you." She leaned back on the sofa and laughed nervously, almost hysterically. "Roman, where? With whom? I don't even have time to dye my hair, let alone—" But the laughter broke and tears came to her eyes. She covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, what has happened to us?" she whispered through her fingers. My hands dropped. I wanted to sit next to her and hug her, but I was afraid she would push me away. "I don't want to lose you," I said quietly, "but I feel like I'm losing you every day." She removed her hands and looked at me with a tired, dull look. "Me too," she exhaled. "I just don't know how to get it back." The room was silent, broken only by the muttering of Connor as he played with his toys on the floor. "Maybe you could tell me honestly what you feel," I asked. "I'll understand everything, I promise. Better the truth than this." I didn't finish, but she understood. Sarah looked away toward the window, her lips trembling, clearly struggling with herself. "It's hard for me," she finally managed to squeeze out. "It's really hard to talk to you about this. You're a good person, but everything inside me is broken, and it seems like it's broken between us too." I froze, leaning against the wall, my heart pounding. Her confession, almost a confession, hung in the air. "Between us, everything broke down?" I asked hoarsely. "Is that how you feel?" She was silent, biting her lips. This silence said more than words. Everything inside me broke down. Although no direct words were spoken, I was sure. She does not love me, perhaps for a long time. "I see," I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat. Anger, despair, pain, everything was mixed up. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I just clenched my jaws, fighting with myself. At that moment, Connor started crying. He must have felt the tension or was tired of playing alone. I picked my son up in my arms just to distract myself from the tears that were rolling down my face. "I'll feed him," I said hoarsely, and, without waiting for an answer, carried the baby into the kitchen. Tears were treacherously burning my eyes, but I held back so as not to burst into tears in front of the child. I sat Connor down in the high chair and began mechanically mashing the banana in his plate. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared at the kitchen door. Her face was wet with tears. "Forgive me," she whispered. I didn't mean to scream." And she stopped short. I didn't turn around, afraid to break down. "Let's go talk," she asked quietly. "Let's do it later," I answered just as quietly. "Now we need to feed him." I heard her sob. Then footsteps, she was gone. I fed my son some fruit puree, trying to appear calm. Connor, happy with the food, babbled something, smiled at me. I smiled back at him through force, feeling my heart breaking. Is this really it? Is this really how it will all end, with tears and mutual accusations? When Connor had eaten his fill, I wiped his mouth and, glancing at the clock, realized that it was already evening. Sarah had locked herself in the bedroom, apparently coming to her senses. I didn't know what to say to her, how to behave. After putting my son to bed later, I walked into the living room and sank down on the couch, feeling completely empty. The thought was pounding in my head. She's cheating on me. Or at least she wants to leave. She'd said it straight out that everything between us was broken. The tears came again. I pinched the bridge of my nose with my fingers, trying to stop the shaking. Her phone was lying on the coffee table. She must have left it behind when she went into the bedroom. The screen suddenly lit up with an incoming message. And although I knew I had no right, curiosity and pain got the better of me. I reached out and looked at the screen. The message was from subscriber Nick. My heart sank. "How are you? I'm really worried. Write if you need help. I'm here." My eyes darted over the lines. I swiped my finger, unlocking my phone. Fortunately or unfortunately, there was no password. Their conversation opened. Scrolling up, I saw a whole series of messages from the last days and weeks. Lots of hearts, sweet words. "Here, today was incredible. Your kisses are still on my lips." A little higher. "I can't wait for the next time we meet alone." Another, "I love you." My hand shook so much that the phone almost fell out. It was as if a veil had come over my eyes. It seemed as if the ground had slipped out from under my feet. Here it is. Confirmation of my worst fears. Not just friendship love. Does she love him? Does he love her? They've kissed. Had one-on-one encounters. God knows how far this has gone. I started shaking. I wanted to rush into the bedroom, wake her up and demand an explanation. To scream, to swear. But my son was sleeping in the crib next to me, our son, and that sobered me up. You can't make a scene in front of a child. And did I have the moral right to scream? What's the point? The fact had already taken place. I carefully placed the phone on the table, trying to breathe evenly. My heart was beating like crazy. There was a noise in my ears. A memory popped into my head. Our wedding day. Sarah looked at me with shining eyes and vowed to love me through thick and thin. We couldn't even imagine the grief we would have to endure. And then, the love was gone. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away. I heard Sarah come out of the bedroom early in the morning and go to the kitchen. Apparently, she was looking for me and was surprised not to find me in bed. I got up from the couch and also went to the kitchen. She flinched when she saw me, and her face immediately took on a guilty expression. "Did you sleep here?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I answered calmly. "We need to talk." Sarah clutched the edge of her sweater with her hands, her gaze darting around. "Jason, she began, but I interrupted her gently. "Let me speak, please." She fell silent, nodding. "I know everything," I said almost in a whisper. "I saw the correspondence with Nick." Her face instantly turned pale, her eyes widened in horror. "Did you read it?" she asked barely audibly. "Yes," I admitted, lowering my head. "Sorry, I couldn't help myself." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, tears immediately flowing from her eyes. "Oh, Lord," she moaned. "Forgive me. Forgive me." She took a step towards me as if she wanted to touch her, but I moved away, raising my palm. "Stop. Let me finish." I was surprised at how even my voice sounded. "If we start apologizing or arguing now, we won't solve anything." She burst into tears, covered her face with her hands, and sat down on a chair. I stood there, unable to even come close to comfort her, as before. Now there was a chasm between us. "I won't ask how or why," I continued hoarsely. "It doesn't matter anymore. The fact is that this can't go on any longer." She sobbed and removed her hands, desperately trying to meet my gaze. "I understand. You want me to leave?" she asked in a breaking voice. This assumption made me feel sick inside, but outwardly I was calm. "Not yet," I said. "We can always leave. I want to try to save what's left. Honestly, I'm not sure there's anything left, Sarah. But for Connor's sake, for the years we had, maybe we should give ourselves a chance." She looked at me in amazement through her tears. "A chance?" she asked again, not believing it. "Let's go to a family psychologist," I suggested, and these words sounded like they were coming from the outside. "Together, let's try to figure out where we lost each other." "After what did I do?" she whispered. I swallowed hard, but nodded. "Yes, I am not without sin either. I basically abandoned you, left you alone, I understand." My voice trembled, but I pulled myself together. "I don't know if we can do it. But if we don't try, we'll regret it later." Sarah closed her eyes and shook her head. "You are too kind. I don't deserve it," she whispered. "It's not about deserve," I answered wearily. "It's about setting things in their proper place. I don't want to make decisions in this state. It's better to talk to someone neutral." She did not answer, but only cried. Her face dropped onto her folded hands. I came closer and hesitantly put my hand on her shoulder. She shuddered and raised her eyes to me, full of pain and regret. "We'll try," I said quietly. "And then, whatever happens, happens." Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. We had a hard time finding a family psychologist who could see us in the next few days. Thanks to Tom, his sister gave us the contact of a trusted specialist, and when I called, almost begging for an urgent meeting, they met us halfway. On the appointed evening, we drove up to a low-office building not far from the center. We barely spoke on the way. Sarah sat next to me in the passenger seat, pale, fiddling with a handkerchief. I was nervous, too. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel. We were both probably afraid of this conversation, but we knew there was no other way. The psychologist's name was Dr. Emily Roberts. She was a short woman in her 50s, with a soft smile and attentive eyes. Her cozy office, with a sofa and armchairs, looked more like a living room than a doctor's office. There were calming landscapes on the walls, and a model of the human brain, mixed with ceramic figurines, was on the shelf. "Well, make yourself comfortable," Dr. Roberts suggested, pointing us to the sofa. We sat down, keeping a distance between us about half a meter of empty space that seemed to scream our distance. I stole a glance at Sarah. She steepled her fingers and looked down. The doctor sat down in the chair opposite, crossed her legs, and took a notepad. "So, my name is Emily. You can call me by my first name. Tell me what brought you to me. What do you want to work with?" She began calmly. My wife and I exchanged glances. I nodded knowingly to Sarah, as if to say, "You start if you want." But she quickly looked away. I had to take the initiative. I guess I should start with the main thing," I said quietly. "We've been married for 7.5 years. Last year we were in a crisis." "A very serious crisis," Sarah added quietly. Dr. Roberts nodded, urging him to continue. "A year ago we had a baby," I said. "A long-awaited son. But there was almost no joy because—" I stopped and looked at Sarah. She was still looking at the floor, but her lips were pressed together, as if holding back pain. "Because my wife started having severe postpartum depression." "I see," the doctor responded softly. "Sarah, Have you had any treatment? Sarah brought the crumpled handkerchief to her lips. A little, she whispered. I went to the doctor, took pills, and went to a support group. Yeah, I confirmed. At first it was really hard. She practically stopped talking. She was apathetic. I didn't know what to do. What did you do? The therapist asked, noting something in her notebook. I smiled bitterly. I worked. I worked overtime. To be honest, I ran away to work because I felt helpless at home. Sarah looked up at me for the first time, a tear glistening in her eyes. It's not his fault, she said suddenly, turning to the doctor. He tried his best. It was me. I was terrible. You weren't terrible, I automatically objected, but the psychologist stopped us with a gesture. Please don't interrupt. Let everyone have their say, okay? We fell silent. The doctor looked around at us. So, you had a baby. Sarah suffered from postpartum depression. You, Jason, worked a lot during this time. May I ask, for what reason did you take on more work? Was it just helplessness, or was it financially difficult? Both, I answered honestly. Financially because of bills, expenses with a child, and Sarah had no income on vacation. Well, and really, I was restless at home. I pushed him away, Sarah added in a dull voice. I didn't let anyone in. I felt bad and I withdrew. The doctor tilted her head slightly. Did you feel abandoned? Sarah nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. I was a terrible wife and mother, she breathed out. I thought my husband had fallen out of love with me because he kept leaving. But in reality, I guess I pushed him out myself. I whispered, No, I haven't fallen out of love. Dr. Roberts smiled slightly in support of our attempts to speak. Okay, so the first layer is that we have mutual grievances. Sarah is offended that Jason abandoned her in a difficult moment. Jason, are you offended that Sarah pushed you away? I thought about it. I guess, yes, I admitted. It was very painful for me to see her in such a state and not be able to help. I guess I felt useless to her. Sarah sobbed. Oh no, she moaned. You were needed, I'm sorry. I just didn't have the strength for anything. I couldn't resist and carefully touched her shoulder. She didn't move away. I understand now, I said softly. I didn't understand then. The doctor quietly cleared her throat, drawing our attention back to her. Let's continue, she said. What happened next? Sarah, tell me what's been happening with your feelings these past few months. Sarah wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and straightened up a little. After a few months of group therapy, I started to feel better. I started to come to my senses, but my relationship with Jason was already broken, she said with difficulty. It was like we had become unaccustomed to each other. He became a stranger in my house. My heart sank painfully, but I didn't argue it was the bitter truth. At some point, Sarah continued, I felt lonely. Terrible loneliness, even though my husband and child were nearby. And I found solace elsewhere. She spoke the last words almost in a whisper, but in the quiet office they sounded clear. The doctor nodded, as if expecting to hear this. You started having an extramarital affair, right? Yes, Sarah breathed out and covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed, turning to me. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I tried to hold on. It already happened, I said quietly. We're trying to get over it. The psychologist raised her eyebrows slightly. It's commendable that you didn't rush straight to divorce, but decided to fight, she noted. Whose initiative was it to contact me? His. I was surprised at how quickly Sarah said it. The doctor smiled. Good. So, Jason, you're determined to save your marriage. And you, Sarah? Sarah slumped her shoulders. I don't know, she said honestly. It's my fault. It hurts me to look into his eyes. I thought he would hate me, throw me out. But here he is, sitting next to me, holding my hand. She looked down. Without noticing it, I took her hand when she spoke. I'm ashamed and scared. I don't know if it's possible to return everything. So you're wondering if the relationship is worth maintaining? Dr. Roberts asked. Sarah nodded, tears welling up again. I ruined everything. And to be honest, I'm not sure I still love him, she whispered, looking down. I have so much resentment that it killed love. These words pierced me, although deep down I already suspected something like this. I involuntarily unclenched my fingers, letting go of her hand. Sarah burst into tears again, pressing a handkerchief to her face. The doctor gave her a minute to cry, then turned to me softly. Jason, you heard what Sarah said. How do you react? I swallowed. If she doesn't love me anymore, then why are we here? I asked hoarsely, trying not to break down. Sarah raised her head. I didn't say that I don't love at all, she objected. I don't understand what I feel. Everything is mixed up. Gratitude, guilt, pity. Is there love there? The doctor asked directly. Sarah was silent, her eyes darting around. There was a painful pause. I sat, tensely waiting. My heart seemed to stop while she thought. I don't know, she finally whispered. This, I don't know, sounded like a death sentence to me. I lowered my head, trying to hide the wave of despair that had washed over me. The doctor looked at me carefully. Jason, what about you? Do you love Sarah now? The question caught me off guard, although it was obvious that it had to be asked. I found myself unable to answer right away either. Do I love him? After everything that happened? After the betrayal? Probably yes. But this feeling is under all the layers of pain. I love her, I said quietly, but probably not as much as before. Otherwise, it wouldn't hurt so much. Sarah sniffled. The doctor nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, just stating the fact. I see. You are both unsure of your feelings. The question is, why try to save the marriage then? Just for the sake of the child? Or is there something else that keeps you together? I hesitated, choosing my words. Probably a habit. 7 years of life is a long time. We have a common history. And a sense of duty, Sarah whispered. He's done so much for me. I feel obligated to try. The doctor made another note in her notebook. So, we have mutual grievances, guilt, lost closeness, and doubts about feelings. At the same time, there is a mutual desire for the relationship, at least out of a sense of duty and for the sake of the child. Did I sum it up correctly? We nodded silently. The psychologist put her pen down. I'm not going to give a verdict now, she said, but I need to ask one more thing to understand the situation more deeply. Sarah, are you still in a relationship with that man? No, she shook her head quickly. I cut it all off as soon as my husband found out. I don't talk to Nick now. My stomach twisted at the mention of his name, but I kept quiet. Okay, so there's no third person in this room, which makes it easier, the doctor said. Now, let's talk about what you remember your marriage like before you had a child. Did you have a strong intimacy, understanding, or were there problems before? Sarah and I looked at each other. She was the first to answer. I think we were happy, she said quietly. We rarely argued. We could talk about everything. I nodded in confirmation. We've had some tough times, but we've been through them together, I added. Sarah had a miscarriage a few years ago, then her dad died. I had a serious injury at work. But we didn't grow apart then, on the contrary, we supported each other. Sarah clutched the ribbons of her scarf. Yes, before the child we somehow managed, even sorrows brought us closer together. And after the baby was born, what was the last straw? The psychologist asked. Sarah smiled bitterly through her tears. I myself, my illness, I probably broke down, she answered. I'm also to blame, I added. Instead of being there, I gave in and ran away, and I got offended at her for sinking into depression. The doctor listened attentively, nodding. It seems like you both had enough reasons to feel abandoned. Both experienced pain and lack of support, she concluded. That's the important point. There was no good and bad. You were both victims of circumstances and each other's mistakes. These words had a strange effect. I suddenly realized that all this time I had perceived myself as a victim from her coldness, then from her betrayal. But I also left her when she was feeling bad. We were both victims and culprits at the same time. Well, Dr. Roberts continued, We have a lot of work ahead of us. I'll help you if you decide to continue therapy. But I want to warn you right away, not every marriage can be saved. Sometimes people come to the conclusion that it's better for them to separate. My job is to help you honestly understand yourself and your relationship so that you can make an informed decision about whether to continue together or apart. Sarah and I were silent. It was painful to hear, but at least it was honest. "Are you willing to work on this?" she asked. "Yes," I answered immediately. Sarah nodded uncertainly. "Okay," the doctor stood up, signaling that the session was coming to an end. "I think we should see each other once a week for at least a few weeks, and then we'll see. We'll try different techniques discussing grievances, restoring communication, maybe doing exercises at home." We got up too. "Thank you, doctor," I said, shaking her hand. My palm was damp. Sarah also thanked quietly. "Take care of yourself, and most importantly, while the therapy is going on, try to be as open with each other as possible," the psychologist advised us. Leaving the office, we walked to the car in silence. It was already dark outside, a light rain was falling. I opened the umbrella above us. We walked side by side, but as if we were still at a distance. Over the next few weeks, we continued to see Dr. Roberts once a week. Between sessions, she gave us assignments, such as making a list of grievances and sharing them, or trying to go somewhere together without the baby, like a date, and then sharing our feelings. We tried to do everything conscientiously. At least I certainly tried. Sarah didn't mind either, although it was obvious that it wasn't easy for her. So one evening, leaving Connor in Kate's care, my wife and I went out for dinner alone. We chose a small restaurant where we had once celebrated an anniversary. I hoped that the familiar, cozy atmosphere would help us relax. But the dinner was strained. We talked mostly about our son, how he learned to point to pictures in a book, or how he said a new word. About work, I mentioned a couple of stories from the fire department. Sarah just nodded, not paying attention. About her affairs, there was nothing to talk about at all, because she still had not decided whether to go back to work and was sitting at home. Silence hung in the pauses between these routine topics. I felt as if I was on a date with a near stranger with whom I had found no common ground. Sarah picked at her salad with her fork, barely touching it. I asked if it was tasty. She answered vaguely, "Yes, it's fine." She herself didn't ask about anything. Before, she would have been keenly interested in the details of my stories, would have laughed at my jokes. Now it's like a light has gone out in her eyes. When we got home, Kate, picking up her coat, asked happily, "So how was your evening, lovebirds?" Sarah and I looked at each other, and it seemed like our faces reflected everything. Kate fell silent, embarrassed, and we thanked her and said goodbye. Later that night, I asked Sarah, "Were you feeling very bad today?" We were already lying in bed, looking at the ceiling. "No, not bad," she answered slowly. "Just not good." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'm sorry," she added after a pause. "You meant well." "Don't apologize. It's no one's fault that there are no feelings," I said, and for some reason these words came easily. I no longer felt sharp stabs of pain, rather, fatigue and emptiness. Sarah turned to me. "Jason, maybe we really shouldn't torture each other," she breathed out. "We try, but it doesn't work." My heart sank, but I calmly endured her gaze. "Are you suggesting that we end the therapy?" I asked. "I suggest finishing us," she whispered. I was silent for a few seconds, digesting what I had heard. Deep down, I knew she was right, but admitting it out loud was scary. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Sarah smiled sadly. For the first time in a long time, I saw a smile on her face, but a bitter one. "I think so," she said. "I don't want to hurt you any more with my indifference. Or myself. We're exhausted." I closed my eyes. No matter how I prepared myself for this, it was painful to hear. But inside, strangely, no protest arose. Only bitterness. "Perhaps you're right," I said finally, opening my eyes. "If neither you nor I have that feeling anymore, then what's the point?" Sarah nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. I feel very guilty before you, she whispered. But if I continue to live with the feeling of guilt, I will not be able to love again. And you will not be able to forgive completely. Probably, I agreed quietly, although I try to forgive, but I won't be able to forget. We lay there in silence for a little while longer. Shall we say therapy? I asked. Yes, we need to tell the doctor honestly, she answered. Fine. So we actually decided to break up. Without scandal, without tragedy, exhausted, like two runners who didn't finish the marathon. Once Sarah and I had decided to divorce, we tried to move on to practical matters as quickly as possible. It was a strange time. On the one hand, our hearts ached with every conversation about dividing our lives. On the other, we felt relieved that we had stopped tormenting each other with uncertainty. The first thing we decided to do was tell our loved ones about our decision. Sarah called her mother, Lucy. It was a difficult conversation. I heard only fragments of her talking on the phone in the bedroom, quietly, crying. Then she told me that my mother was very upset, asking her to think about it, not to rush. But Sarah reassured her that the decision was mutual and final. Lucy offered to come help, but Sarah refused. She didn't want her mother to see her in such a state. I called my mother. She had long suspected that things weren't going well between us by her voice, by the rare conversations. When she heard about the divorce, my mother was silent for a long time, and then quietly asked, "Are you sure, son?" I answered that I was sure. My mother sighed and said that she loved us all, me, Sarah, and the baby, and that we knew what was best. I felt sadness in her voice, but also understanding. I also needed to tell Kate. The day after our crucial conversation, I asked her to meet me at a nearby cafe. Sarah didn't mind Connor had been sleeping during the day, and she didn't mind staying with him. Kate came quickly, concerned by my tone on the phone. We sat at a table in the corner, and I twirled my cup of cooling coffee for a long time, not knowing where to start. But Kate figured it out herself. "You have something with Sarah, right?" she asked softly, placing her hand on my arm. I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "We're getting divorced," I said almost in a whisper. Kate's eyes filled with regret. "Oh, Jay." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry." "We're sorry too." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. We tried, honestly, but it didn't work out. I gave her a brief description of the situation, including Sarah's betrayal. I didn't want to hide it, and Kate would have found out sooner or later anyway. Kate listened, biting her lip. She didn't look judgmental, more like sad. "How are you?" she asked when I finished. I shrugged. "I haven't figured it out yet. I'm empty inside, to be honest." "You're not alone," Kate said seriously. "I'm here. If you need help moving, or just a good cry, call me anytime." "Thank you," I exhaled, genuinely touched. "I'm afraid I'll definitely need a loader in the near future," I tried to joke. "I'm the best mover in Denver," she said, playing along, but her eyes were sad. We sat for a while longer, discussing my plans. I said I was going to rent an apartment closer to my current home so that it would be more convenient to visit Connor. Kate immediately offered to help with the search. She knew a realtor. When I got home, I found Sarah sorting through paperwork. She pulled out a folder from the closet with all our papers: marriage certificate, house deeds, insurance, bills. When I appeared, she raised her red eyes. I decided to put things in order. It will be needed soon. I sat down next to her in silence. In front of us lay our family history, recorded on paper. Here was the marriage certificate. It seemed like only recently we had signed at the mayor's office with hands shaking with excitement. Here was the certificate for the purchase of the car we had bought together 3 years ago. And here was the mortgage contract for our apartment. "What about the house?" I asked cautiously. Our apartment belonged to both of us, but there was no point in staying in it together. "I could stay with Connor for now," Sarah said quietly. "And you, if you rent something nearby, you can come over or take him to your place as we agree." "Yes, I thought so too," I nodded. "For now, let him live here in his usual surroundings. Then we'll decide." Sarah looked down. "I probably can't afford the mortgage on my own," she whispered. But selling the apartment now is also stressful. Don't think about it now, I replied. Once we formalize the divorce, we'll decide later either we'll sell it and split the money or I'll help pay it off while Connor is little. I'm sorry, she began, but I shook my head. Don't apologize. We'll solve everything fine. We agreed that we would stay under the same roof for a couple more months at most until the official registration. I continued to sleep on the couch. We did not interfere in each other's lives. We only shared the worries about our son. It was not easy emotionally, but bearable. Then we needed to find a lawyer or resolve the issue through a mediator. We decided to hire one lawyer for both of us to formalize everything peacefully without going to court. Sarah suggested a lawyer who helped her friend with her divorce. I agreed. The meeting with the lawyer was surprisingly calm. Mr. Brooks, a gray-haired, friendly man, asked us about the agreements. We immediately stated that we wanted joint custody of the child, without arguments. We decided to hold off on selling the house for now, having written down that Sarah would live there with Connor, and we would postpone the issue of dividing the property for a year. Financially, I did not mind supporting them, paying the mortgage plus alimony, which the lawyer advised to formally write down for the sake of order. When Mr. Brooks asked about the reason for the divorce, Sarah and I looked at each other. Usually they put irreconcilable differences, so we wrote that down without going into details. We breathed a sigh of relief as we left his office. The legal process had been launched. All that was left was to wait for the dates and signatures. On the way to the car, Sarah suddenly said, "People will probably ask why we broke up." "Perhaps," I answered. "What should I tell them?" she continued, looking away. I thought about it. Should I tell everyone the truth about the betrayal? No point, and that's only part of the truth. I think we'll say what's in the documents. Disagreements, characters didn't get along after the birth of the child, I suggested. To relatives, they already know the situation. We don't have to explain anything to the rest. Sarah nodded. Fine. At the end of April, I found a suitable apartment for myself, a small 2-room apartment in the neighboring block. Kate helped me with a realtor, and I quickly completed the lease. We chose a place close by so that I could walk there when I needed to. My moving day was tough. I packed up little by little, trying not to look at Sarah. She didn't interfere either taking care of Connor or sitting in another room. Kate and another coworker helped move boxes and furniture. I only took my desk and chair, leaving the sofa and common furniture with Sarah. Finally, everything necessary was loaded into the minibus. It was time to say goodbye to home. Sarah held Connor in her arms at the entrance as we carried out the last of our things. The little boy happily patted his mother on the shoulder, not realizing that his father was leaving not for work, but for a long time. I approached them. There was a lump in my throat. "Well, I'll go then," I said, trying to smile. "I'll drop by tomorrow after work, okay?" Sarah nodded, looking down. I stroked my son's back, then leaned over and kissed his plump cheek. "Bye, darling. Dad will see you soon," I said quietly. Connor mumbled something and reached out to me with his hands. His heart sank. He didn't understand why his dad was leaving with the bags. I had to hand it to Kate, who was standing next to me, to give Sarah a goodbye hug. It was an awkward, short hug, more of a mutual respect. "Take care," I whispered. "And you," she replied. I stepped back, feeling tears welling up in my eyes, turned around, and walked quickly to the car. Kate got into the driver's seat, and I sat next to her. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse in the mirror. Sarah was still standing at the entrance, holding her son's hand, watching us go. The official divorce was finalized in early summer. Our attorney filed all the papers in the spring, and after the allotted time, we were scheduled for a hearing in the Denver court to approve the agreement. That day, I arrived at the courthouse early. I was wearing a formal suit. Strange. I usually wore it for holidays, but here for a divorce. I felt constrained. In the courtroom lobby, amid the bustle of lawyers and visitors, I saw Sarah. She had also decided to arrive early. She was dressed in a simple black dress and jacket. She looked pale, focused. "Hello," I said quietly, approaching. "Hello," she responded. We hugged awkwardly, a light formal gesture. Before, we would have definitely kissed each other when we met, but that was in another life. Our lawyer, Mr. Brooks, came over, greeted us, and ran through the documents again. Everything was ready. We had agreed to all the points. All that remained was to get the judge's approval. We were invited into a small courtroom. The judge, an elderly man with a tired look, looked through the papers and asked a couple of formal questions. We answered briefly, to the point. He didn't even raise the question of the reason for the family's breakup. The standard, irreconcilable differences suited him. 10 minutes later, it was all over. The judge signed the divorce decree and wished us luck for the future in a tone that sounds like he wishes good luck to those getting divorced several times a day. Sarah and I signed and received copies of the decision. The lawyer shook our hands. "I'm glad you decided everything in a civilized manner." I smiled weakly. There was no joy, but war had been avoided, and thank goodness for that. As we left the hall, we stopped at the stairs. People were scurrying past for them. It was a normal day, but for us, the family had just ceased to exist legally. Sarah stood, clutching the folder of documents to her chest. Tears glistened in her eyes, although a smile tried to remain on her face. "Well then," I exhaled, "now it's official." She nodded, blinking, causing a tear to roll down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you for coming. I mean, of course you would have come." She was confused, and for the first time in a long time, I saw in her the Sarah I loved, a little awkward, sincere. "It's okay," I said softly. "We made it." We walked down the courthouse steps to the street. The sun was blinding my eyes. I squinted. "Should I take you home?" I offered. Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm taking the bus. I want to walk a little." "Okay," I didn't insist. We stood silently for a few seconds. I wanted to say something at the end, but all the words seemed unnecessary or too pompous. Finally, Sarah spoke first. "Maybe we should celebrate somehow." She smiled sadly. "I know, divorces are not usually celebrated, but maybe we should have coffee like friends." Her proposal surprised me, but in a good way. After all, we really did part on good terms. "Go ahead," I agreed. We went into a coffee shop across the street. We ordered a cappuccino to go. I was afraid to sit together for a long time, in case emotions would overwhelm us. While the barista prepared the order, we were silent. When the coffee was ready, we walked back out onto the courthouse steps. The hot summer breeze rustled the pages of our documents. "To a new beginning," I said quietly, raising my glass. Sarah clinked her glasses with mine. "To a new beginning," she repeated. We took a sip. The coffee burned the roof of my mouth, but I barely tasted it. "I guess I need to get used to it, that you're not my husband anymore," Sarah said thoughtfully, looking at the passers-by. "Somehow there aren't even words for it, ex-husband." "And you are an ex-wife," I added with slight bitterness. She looked down. "But you're still Connor's father, and a friend, I hope." "Of course," I responded immediately. "We will always remain parents, and friends. I would like that too." Sarah relaxed a little as she sipped her coffee. "By the way," she began hesitantly, "I'm thinking of continuing to go to a psychologist, this time alone, for myself." "That's great," I approved. "It wouldn't hurt me either, I guess." We looked at each other with cautious smiles. It was strange to discuss such things after the trial, but at the same time, it was gratifying that we could speak calmly. Having finished our coffee, we threw away the cups. "I have to go," Sarah said quietly. "My mom is waiting for me with Connor." "Of course," I nodded. "Again, thank you for everything good that we had." The voice shook slightly on the last word. Sarah heard it, and her eyes filled with tears again. She quickly stepped towards me and hugged me tightly. "Thank you too, Jason," she whispered. I hugged her back, feeling a few tears roll out of my eyes. We stood like that for a few moments, letting go of each other completely. Finally, she pulled away and wiped her eyes. "See you," she said, trying to smile. We'll call about the weekend when it's convenient for you to sit with Connor. Uh-huh, I nodded, also trying to look cheerful. Okay, bye. Sarah turned and walked towards the bus stop. I watched her go. Just like that, in one day, we became like old friends, and once we were the closest family. When her figure disappeared around the corner, I sighed, wiped my wet eyes with the back of my hand, and walked to my car. My soul was empty, but somewhere deep inside, there was a spark of hope. Now that the doors of the past had closed, I could try to open new ones. It had been 3 months since Sarah and I had officially divorced. Summer had given way to early fall. During that time, we had developed a more or less stable routine. Connor spent every Wednesday evening and Saturday all day with me, sometimes spending the night at my place if Sarah didn't mind. The rest of the time, he lived with her, but I tried to visit him more often. I'd drop by after my shift for half an hour, bring new toys, or just genuinely miss him and want to see my son. My relationship with Sarah became smooth, almost friendly. We corresponded about our schedules, sometimes exchanging photos of Connor. She sent me pictures of him playing or eating ice cream. I sent her pictures of him walking in the park when I had him. These messages showed warm concern for the child, but we did not touch on personal topics. One day in late September, I went to pick up Connor for the weekend. Sarah answered the door and looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. I was worried. "Is everything okay?" I asked, stepping over the threshold. "Yes, I just didn't get enough sleep," she answered, looking away. Connor was playing on the rug in the living room, and when he saw me, he started jumping up and down, saying, "Dad." I picked him up and kissed him on the cheek. "Hello, hero. Ready to go for a walk with Dad." He babbled something joyful in response. Sarah sat down on the sofa, rubbing her temples tiredly. I sat my son back down to play and carefully sat down next to her. "Listen, maybe I can help you with something," I asked quietly. "You don't seem like yourself." She shook her head. "Everything is fine. It's just that the nights are hard. He hasn't been sleeping well the last few days. He's been acting up. He's probably teething." I nodded. I myself noticed that my son became more restless at night when he spent the night with me. "Let me take him to my place for the night too," I suggested. "You'll get some rest and sleep peacefully." Sarah hesitated. "If it's not too much trouble," she muttered. "I'm happy," I smiled, watching Connor roll the car across the floor. Sarah also tried to smile weakly, but her lips trembled, and suddenly she covered her face with her hands. "Sarah?" I leaned closer. She sobbed. "I'm sorry, I'm just so weak," she whispered through her fingers. "I can't cope alone." I carefully placed my hand on her back. "You're not weak. It's just hard for you. Alone with a baby is a lot of work." She shook her head, wiping away tears. "Others cope, but sometimes I can't bring myself to leave the house for a whole day. Mom helps, but it's hard for her too. She's not getting any younger." "Maybe you should go to work part-time?" I asked cautiously. "Socializing and changing the environment might help." After the divorce, Sarah extended her vacation until the end of the year, but I thought work would distract her from her gloomy thoughts. "I'm thinking about it," she sighed. "I talked to the school principal. Maybe I'll go part-time from the second quarter." "That's good," I encouraged. "They love you there, and you're an excellent psychologist." Sarah smiled bitterly. "What kind of psychologist would I be if I couldn't get my life on track?" "Don't say that," I interrupted softly. "You're a good specialist. The fact that things didn't work out in the family doesn't mean you're a bad psychologist or a bad mother." She looked at me with reddened eyes. "Thank you. You always overestimated me," she smiled sadly. "I'm just telling the truth," I shrugged. Connor, meanwhile, tugged at my pant leg, getting my attention. I picked him up. "Well, my dear, shall we go to Daddy's for the night?" "Let's give Mommy a rest," I said, looking my son in the eyes. He nodded, although he hardly understood the meaning, but he felt the general mood. Sarah stood up and ran her hand through her hair. "I'll pack his things," she said quietly, and went into the nursery. A couple of minutes later, she returned with a small bag. There were pajamas, diapers, and her favorite teddy bear. Thank you. I accepted the bag. Sarah suddenly stepped toward me and hugged me, impulsively and tightly. I froze, then hugged her with one arm, holding my son in the other. Forgive me for everything, she whispered. SHH, everything's fine, I answered. Hang in there, okay? If anything happens, call me, don't be shy. I'll come and help. She nodded, letting me go. Walking outside with Connor, I felt a weight on my soul. Sarah was clearly unhappy. Of course, her happiness was no longer my responsibility, but I was worried. She was the mother of my child, someone who was once close to me, and it hurt to see her broken. On the way home, my son dozed off in his car seat. I found myself thinking that inside, despite my pity for Sarah, I felt a little better. For the first time, I didn't feel constant mental pain, more like compassion and concern. Maybe time was starting to heal. That night, after I put Connor to bed at my place, I did something I'd been putting off for a long time. I called the therapist Tom had recommended, the same one whose sister had recommended Dr. Roberts. He was a male therapist who specialized in post-divorce counseling for men. We set up our first appointment for the following week. Before, I would never have gone to a stranger to talk, but now I understand. Keeping everything inside is a road to nowhere. I wanted to cope with the burden of resentment and guilt, to let go of the past. And if a specialist helps, why not? I also started to socialize more with my friends. Before the divorce, I mostly withdrew and didn't want to see anyone. Now, on the advice of that same Kate, I would occasionally go out for a beer with the guys from the unit or agree to invite old friends to barbecues. At first, I felt like an outsider. There were married couples, noise, laughter, and after all that, I would just sit in the corner. But over time, I began to enjoy the company. I even told my friends funny stories about Connor a couple of times before. It would never have occurred to me to share such personal joys. My colleagues at the fire department also supported me. They knew that I had been through a divorce. You can't hide news in such a team. Once after a shift, our commander, a stern man, boiled water in a kettle and silently poured me a cup of tea. He sat down next to me, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hang in there, brother. You're not the first, you're not the last. The main thing is that I have a son, he's healthy, and everything else will work out." We just sat there for a long time and drank tea in silence, and that was enough for me to feel that I was understood and accepted. Gradually, I learned to speak my mind. If someone at work asked how I was, I no longer brushed it off with the usual "everything is fine," but could honestly say, "It's hard sometimes, but I'm coping." It seemed like a small thing, but for me, admitting my vulnerability was a step forward. During individual sessions with a psychologist, I finally sorted out the whole situation. I talked about my mistakes, how I didn't pay enough attention to Sarah, how I pushed the pain deep inside myself instead of immediately solving the problem. The psychologist helped me let go of the feeling of guilt and resentment, and most importantly, stop considering the divorce the collapse of my entire life. "This is the end of one stage, but the beginning of another," he repeated. "Now you can build your life as you see fit, taking into account your previous experience." And I really began to feel that the past was no longer dragging me down. Yes, the scars remained. Sometimes I would still wake up at night from loneliness, feeling the empty bed next to me. Sometimes I would feel sad about a lost love, especially when I saw young parents walking with a stroller on the playground. But I learned to live through these feelings and not run away from them. In the fall, another significant episode occurred. Kate threw a party for her birthday and invited me. There I met her friend, a nice woman named Laura, an elementary school teacher. We chatted all evening. I told her straight out that I had recently gotten divorced and was not looking for a serious relationship, yet I would never have admitted that so quickly before. Laura was understanding and warm. We exchanged numbers, agreeing to go for coffee sometime without any subtext, just as new acquaintances. At that moment, I realized that I was no longer afraid to open up to people. Maybe not right away, not headlong into new feelings, but at least letting someone into my social circle and even into my heart no longer seemed impossible. While my personal life was still in its infancy, I devoted all my energy to work and my son. But there was a sense of balance in this. At work, I was once again on fire with the cause, took initiative, and the management even hinted at a possible promotion to assistant to the head of the guard. And Connor and I established our own traditions. Every Saturday morning we baked pancakes, or rather, I baked, and he sat on the countertop and happily stirred the dough with a spoon. Then we went to the park to feed the ducks. These simple rituals filled me with happiness and the pride of fatherhood. Once, when I was returning my son home, I found Sarah a little more lively than before. She met us not in a robe, but in jeans and a sweater with light makeup. The house was tidy. Something on the stove smelled of apples and cinnamon. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked with a smile, handing the dozing Connor into her arms. Sarah was embarrassed. "Yes, Carol is coming to see me now," she admitted. Carol is her colleague at school. "We are going to do a presentation together for the parent-teacher meeting. I start work in a week." "Really?" I was delighted. "Great. For half a day for now," she clarified, settling her son in the playpen. "Mom will sit with Connor until lunch, and then I'll be home. I'll try this." "I think you can do it," I said sincerely. Sarah looked at me and suddenly smiled, almost like before, warmly. "Thank you, Jason." At that moment, Carol came in, and I took my leave without disturbing their work. As I left, I thought that Sarah would also feel better when she was back doing what she loved and breaking free from four walls. So life gradually got better. I felt that I had become emotionally mature. I had learned to talk about my feelings, ask for help, and accept support. And most importantly, to remain a good father to my son. Now that the pain of loss was receding, I looked to the future with cautious optimism. The first holiday season after our divorce was tough, but Sarah and I tried our best to make Connor feel loved and happy. On Thanksgiving, we arranged for our son to spend the day with Sarah's family. Her mother really wanted her grandson to be there for the traditional turkey dinner. I didn't mind my mother, and I celebrated together. And the next day, I took Connor over and had a little second Thanksgiving by heating up pumpkin pie and watching cartoons together. He didn't care why there were two turkeys. The main thing was that Dad was there. I was more worried before Christmas. It was the first time we didn't celebrate together. We discussed it and decided that on Christmas Eve, Connor would spend the night at Sarah's and open presents under her tree in the morning, and closer to lunch on the 25th, I would pick him up and take him to my mom's, where he would open presents from the second Santa. On Christmas Eve, I stopped by their house late to leave my presents under Sarah's tree. We had decided that some gifts would be shared between the two of us, to avoid confusion for the baby. Sarah let me in quietly. Connor was already asleep. Together, we laid out the brightly colored boxes under the twinkling lights. For a moment, memories of past Christmases flooded back, how we had decorated that tree together, laughed, kissed under the mistletoe. I glanced at Sarah. She seemed to be lost in her own thoughts. "Thank you for helping," she whispered so as not to wake the baby. "Nonsense," I answered just as quietly. "The main thing is that he's happy." We stood next to the tree, smelling of pine needles and gingerbread cookies that Sarah had baked during the day. For a moment, I felt the warmth of the old home comfort, but it quickly gave way to quiet sadness. "Okay, I have to go," I sighed. "Yeah, sure." Sarah led me to the door. "Merry Christmas, Jason." "And you too," I smiled sadly. "See you tomorrow." I struggled with the lump in my throat the whole way home. Christmas is a family holiday, and no matter how hard we try, our family is not the same anymore. But Christmas morning was a joyous time for Mom and Connor. My son was excitedly tearing the wrapping paper off his presents, squealing with joy when he discovered a toy fire truck, my gift, and a huge stuffed dog from his grandmother. His laughter and delight at that moment healed my wounds better than any medicine. On New Year's Eve, Connor was with me. We decided to alternate holidays. True, he slept through the midnight fireworks, but I held him in my arms, looking out the window at the fireworks, and made a silent wish for the next year to bring us both more happiness. Life returned to normal after the holidays. It was a snowy winter. I even took Sarah and Connor sledding a couple of times just to be friends. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. One of those Saturdays, the three of us were building a snowman in my yard. Connor was squealing with laughter as I threw him handfuls of snow, and Sarah was looking at us and smiling. It was a special moment. We weren't husband and wife, just two loving parents with our child. In those brief moments, I knew we were doing everything right for him. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if it would be worth trying again. These thoughts usually came to me alone on cold evenings, but I quickly pushed them aside. The love that holds a marriage together was no longer there. There was friendship, gratitude, kinship through a child, but not the flame that once bound our hearts. And Sarah would hardly be able to trust me again, and I to forget what had happened. Besides, as Kate once pointed out, Sarah and I communicate better in our divorce than we did in the last years of our marriage. Maybe sometimes it really is better to be good friends and parents apart than bad spouses together. At the end of January, Sarah had a turning point. She went back to work for the first time in a long time. At first, part-time, and by March, almost full-time. I covered for Connor when Lucy, her mother, couldn't sit with him. I even took him for weeknight sleepovers a couple of times when Sarah was having a busy week. It didn't bother me, on the contrary. I was happy to help and spend extra time with the child. The work did Sarah good. I noticed that she began to come alive. When we met, she would tell us, sometimes even to me, can you imagine, how well she had been welcomed back at school, how the children bombarded her with questions, how she now felt more confident as a psychologist. It was clear that she was returning to the self we knew before all the trials. We never directly talked about Nick, the man who played a role in our breakup. But once, while discussing our schedule, Sarah mentioned in passing. Nick wrote to me, asked how I was. I replied that I was fine, but I didn't want to keep in touch. I just nodded, and we didn't pursue the topic further. In my heart, I felt relieved. It seemed that the story with him was finally closed. Connor turned 2 in March. Sarah and I decided to throw a small party at the daycare center, inviting our close friends and grandmas. It was our son's first birthday as divorced parents, but it turned out great. The kids were running around in the playroom, and the adults were watching, taking pictures, laughing. I found myself genuinely enjoying watching Sarah laugh as she bounced Connor around in the dry ball pit. Kate was standing nearby and playfully nudged me with her elbow. "Look, your family looks happy. Who would have thought?" I chuckled. "We are happy, just differently than we planned." Kate nodded understandingly and hugged me. "You're great, Jay. You both are great for setting this up." "Thank you," I replied, squeezing her hand. "We couldn't have done it without your support." As the party drew to a close and the guests began to leave, I noticed Sarah talking to one of her friends, a young teacher from the school. He was helping her wrap Connor's presents. At one point, they shared a friendly laugh about something. I felt neither jealousy nor pain, only a quiet hope that maybe one day she would find her new happiness as she deserved. After the party, we took the tired but happy birthday boy home. Sarah put him to bed, and I stayed in the kitchen, unpacking the gift bags. When she came out, we said to each other at the same time, "It was a good day, huh?" Hearing the synchronicity, we both laughed. It was a light, free laugh, the kind we hadn't shared in a long time. I looked at Sarah. There was no trace of the former sadness on her face, only fatigue mixed with joy for her son. "Yes, it was a great day," I repeated. "We can be proud." "Thank you," she said suddenly, leaning against the door frame. "For coming, for spending so much time with him." "Don't thank me. I'm a father. This is happiness for me." I waved it off. "All the same." She lowered her eyes. "I know, not everyone can do this after a divorce. I'm lucky with you." I touched her shoulder lightly. "We're both lucky to have an amazing son. It was worth going through everything for him." Sarah smiled in agreement. I soon took my leave, and as we said goodbye at the door, Sarah and I exchanged a friendly, short hug. In that moment, I clearly understood. There were no more unsaid things, no more pain or resentment. It was all behind us. Ahead was a long life in which, although we were not together, we would always be close as parents. A fresh March wind was blowing outside. I took a deep breath. Life was getting better, and I felt it with every cell. I'm standing on the balcony of my apartment on a summer evening, watching the sun slowly fade over the horizon. The city is noisy below. Sirens can be heard in the distance. Perhaps my guys are rushing to a call, but today is my day off. Connor is quietly snoring on a chair nearby. We spent the whole day outdoors, and he was exhausted and fell asleep almost right during our dinner in the fresh air. I covered him with a blanket and now enjoy a rare moment of peace and reflection. A year ago, at this time, my life seemed in ruins. I was facing the unknown without a wife, heartbroken, full of guilt and pain. At the time, I felt like I had failed. But a year has passed, and here I am a completely different person. Yes, I no longer have a family as it was, but I have something equally valuable, peace of mind and a beloved son, for whom I try to live my life to the fullest. My marriage with Sarah fell apart, but we retained mutual respect and kindness. Now I understand. This is real adulthood, to accept that sometimes the roads diverge, and it is not the end of the world. Sarah has found her place. She works enthusiastically at school, radiating a confidence that I haven't seen in her for a long time. We are partners in raising our son, and I would say good friends. I am no longer hurt by the sound of her voice or the casual mention of some plans she has without me. On the contrary, I am sincerely happy for her successes and the fact that she is becoming happier too. And I learned a lot. I learned to talk about feelings, ask for help, forgive both others and myself. I learned to appreciate what I have and not try to be a lone hero. I opened up to the world again. I have many plans ahead. I was offered a promotion at work. I accepted the offer. I am gradually returning to my hobbies. I started riding my bike with friends on weekends, and I dream of going on a hike. And even though my personal life is limited to rare friendly meetings with Laura, for example, we sometimes go to the cinema, slowly getting to know each other. This does not sadden me. Now I know for sure everything has its time. I glance at my son. He sleeps sweetly, childishly carefree, and I want to believe that no matter what our future holds, he will always feel the love of both parents. Sarah and I are no longer a couple, but we are a team when it comes to him. The first star twinkles in the sky. I take a deep breath of warm summer air. A feeling of gratitude rolls over me for the fact that even the most difficult trials were overcome with dignity, for the pain to recede, giving way to quiet joy, for every day that has passed, which has made me stronger and wiser. A year ago, I was afraid I'd never be able to smile sincerely again. Now, a smile comes to me on its own whenever I remember a funny phrase from Connor or anticipate tomorrow's plans. Life goes on. Not the way I once dreamed, but perhaps that is its wisdom. We cannot bring back lost love, but we can learn from it and move on. And I do so, without malice, without regret, with an open heart. The evening wind stirs my hair, as if someone invisible gently ruffled me, as if everything will be fine. I raise my eyes to the darkened sky and whisper, although there is no one nearby, everything will be fine. And I believe these words. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.